We've been always told that the classical limit of quantum mechanics is taking the Planck's constant to zero.
Yes.
But what does it really mean to take a dimensionful quantity to zero? Like,
Well, okay. So, well, if you're talking about, well, for example, if you do relativity and you take, well, you just do some Taylor expansion and you obtain the classical limit. So for relativity, well, for very well, but for when you go from semi-classical, well, from quantum mechanics to classical mechanics by taking the Planck constant to zero, well, that's the point of what I was trying to say yesterday. It is not as obvious as it sounds. You're talking about taking the limit of operators, and then something happens, and I'm saying that it's classical. So what I was trying to say yesterday is that you can do that. Well, you can say something formally, but well, I do analysis, and I don't find this very satisfactory. You can, but you can do that with a hardcore analysis, and that's why I finished with Edwards' theorem by saying that basically you look at what you do in quantum mechanics. So you have wave functions, things like that. The best way of looking at those things is using the Wigner transform, so that you have the picture of your states in position and in momentum. And when you take the limit as the Planck constant goes to zero, what you have is something very singular. But when you look at this singularity, well, then it is what you should expect. And when you look at this when you look at the behavior of this singularity, basically this singularity moves along the classical trajectories. So in this sense, you can see quantum mechanics as real life, and what you see when what you experience as a human being is because the Planck constant is so small, you just see the singularities. You just see, well, the effects that you observe are classical in the sense that what you see is the singularity is moving according to what Newton said was classical dynamics. So it's not a complete set. I mean, so the point I was trying to make was that basically, in my views, if you want to do something, I mean, you can rely on your intuition and do lots of things physically and so on, and that's very good for people who have physical intuitions. For people who don't have physical intuitions, you just do a lot of hardcore analysis, and what should appear should have physical interpretation.
so this singularity is the Hamiltonian vector flow.
Yeah, this singularity follows the Hamiltonian vector flow.
Okay.
So that's the point, and that's in this sense. In this sense, the limit of quantum mechanics is classical mechanics. But well, this is for just one example, which has been worked out at the end of the 60s by a Russian guy. Everything was in Russian, and he was doing something like mathematical physics, and it was maybe not as rigorous as I would like it to be. So the question is, what can you do in a very what can you do in a much more rigorous way? Well, so there is this school of people doing semi-classical analysis with lots of what I've called yesterday OP-H, with Weil or Kohn-Nuremberg, and the question is, what can you do about the solution of the Schrödinger equation, especially about the spectrum and so on, when you have a potential, like a well or double well or Canal thing, or they have lots of but this requires a lot of analysis, and usually, well, it's a community which doesn't, I mean, you know how it is in mathematics or in physics, people don't really talk to each other because the vocabulary is very different. And what I'm trying to argue here is that, we should talk to each other, and we should try to do a bit of analysis as well. Well, so I must say, so today I'm going to explain where I come from, not what I did in my PhD, but my general domain of research, and say how it is related to the questions I asked yesterday. Of course, what I talked about yesterday was very humble from the point of view of physics. Everything was in R2N and things like that. answer. But in my views, well, you have to understand first those questions fundamentally, and after you have to wonder, okay, now if I'm on a manifold, how do I interact with the curvature? How do I interact with this? How do I? Well, I think those questions are are quite advanced, and from the point of view of analysis, well, they are very interesting. But from the point of view of analysis, you can already do lots of things when you don't have curvature. I say that, but tomorrow I will say, okay, I don't care about curvature. What if you have something non-commutative, which is, well, it's what I like to do. But so let me tell you where I come from, and I will try to make a link with what I tried to explain yesterday. But so the question of how much can you explain about the Planck constant going to zero, so quantum mechanics gives classical mechanics, it is current research. It is, it has been, from the point of view of rigorous analysis, it has been, people have been studying that like really intensively and very formally and since the 80s. So it's not, and yeah, they have work to do, they have plenty of work to do. So what I would like to talk about today is, it's my domain of research. It's harmonic analysis. So it's more about what is harmonic analysis and how it relates to what I talked about yesterday, and what I do for a living, which type of mathematics I produce, and the latter I will talk about tomorrow. So, what is harmonic analysis? So this is a very, very personal viewpoint. For me, harmonic analysis is just, it's just basically what Fourier did, Joseph Fourier did 200 years ago, and what it has become nowadays. So what Fourier did, he studied the heat and wave equations, and he observed that you could really describe the solution of the heat equation or wave equation if you decompose those functions into sine and cosine functions. So basically he developed the notion of Fourier series to solve heat equations and wave equations. So the thing is that if you have a Fourier series, you know that the coefficients are obtained as the integral of your functions, again exponential to I. So it was also so associated with the question of Fourier's work, 50, 60 years ago appeared the question of what does it mean exactly to integrate a function against something. So linked with the work of Fourier, there is a question of integration and measure theory. And another thing is that, you have the Fourier series, so you have a function on the torus, and you decompose it into Fourier series. But basically, what can you say if you decompose a function which is not on the torus, but which is on the sphere, and you have something analogous to Fourier series? So this is called, on the sphere, this is called spherical harmonics, which are very well known and very much studied with different points of view. So I'm going to accelerate a bit and to completely skip the question of what happens when everybody was doing quantum mechanics to talk about what people did in analysis. And I'm going to talk about so another big step in harmonic analysis related to those questions, related to the question of how to study heat and wave equations or more those types of equations. In order to study those equations, you want to you have to study some types of operators which almost solve those equations, and so the types of operators which appear are the singular integral operators, which have been studied. So in Russia it was Milin, and on the American side, Calderon and Zygmunt, and then Stein are the big name of the domain, and they worked. They work in the in the US and the Americas. So something which is maybe a bit less well known, but something that I like is the fact that a lot of people doing harmonic analysis also study something, well, analysis on the, on manifolds which are a bit degenerate, which are sub-Riemannian, in the sense that, you don't, for example, you don't have an elliptic operator, you have a sub-elliptic operator, and the way to do that is to do some analysis on nilpotency group. So that's something that if you have any question about that, I can sort of answer. And something which is also related to harmonic analysis is, and very much related to what Fourier did, was to say, okay, if you have a function, like a signal, you can, like a sound, you can decompose it in Fourier series. And for example, what you hear are mainly the first terms in your Fourier series. And the question, so of course, nowadays, if you record something on your phone or whatever, what you will have is not, what will be recorded is it's not really the coefficient of your Fourier series. It's something along the line of the coefficients of your Fourier series. It will be the short-time Fourier transform, or something which is even more advanced, which is called the wavelets, which are just like Fourier series, but much more evolved. It's a way of decomposing functions, and after of recovering most of your functions. And so I should say that those things are very, very useful. They are really part of harmonic analysis. Most of the time on the applied side. For example, 1 month ago there was the Abel Prize, which is like the Nobel Prize for mathematics, and it was awarded to Yves Meyer for his work on harmonic analysis and wavelets. So this is. So basically, each time you take a picture or you record something, you're using harmonic analysis. I want to say harmonic analysis is good for you. And so for me, what harmonic analysis is you study decompositions of, for example, functions or operators and so on. And something that is very something that so it's. Something that I do is more harmonic analysis on Lie groups, because in this case you want to understand how the structure of the group interacts with the operators and the functions which appear naturally on the Lie groups. So harmonic analysis, as I just said, is really useful with application in engineering with wavelets and things like that. And I should emphasize the fact that the best way of decomposing, of having wavelets and things like that, the best way of understanding those things is basically to have to understand the group action underlying your decompositions. So. I mean, even when you do very applied harmonic analysis, for me, there should always be some group action underlying something. But it's a personal thing. So if you do harmonic analysis, there's also a type of harmonic analysis which is very much related to the problem of measure theory. And so I guess, so for example, in the UK, in Edinburgh, people doing harmonic analysis are particularly fascinated with the Kakeya problem, which is, okay, I won't explain because, I won't explain it because I don't have time, but it is an interesting problem. And another important point is of harmonic analysis is the question of singular integral operators. So here. So it is about studying the operators which appear in the study of partial differential equations, and with certain methods which really comes from decomposition of the functions and of the operators in a good way. So officially, you should always have in mind applications to partial differential equations, but mainly having fun with decompositions of functions and line group actions. So So today I will be discussing well, just a few slides about harmonic analysis on Lie groups and homogeneous domain. And tomorrow, when I will talk about my work, I will discuss a bit more this aspect, especially on the Heisenberg group, and this will have a lot of relation with what we saw yesterday, because well, the Heisenberg group, as the name suggests, is very much related to quantum mechanics. So I will be discussing so another aspect of what we saw yesterday, which is related to harmonic analysis. So it's a harmonic and Fourier analysis, singular integral operators. And from that part of harmonic analysis, well, it emerged in the 60s the theory of pseudo-differential operators, which became the phase-space analysis, and which, well, for me it is, well, so don't tell anyone, but for me it is just an outgrowth of harmonic analysis. So this is also known as microlocal analysis, and an important part of microlocal analysis is to have pseudo-differential operator with a small constant called h, or sometimes epsilon, and you want to understand what happens when h tends to 0, to have a good understanding of the motto, which was, if you take the Planck constant to 0, quantum mechanics becomes classical mechanics. So you would like to understand those types of things, but for more interesting things than what I did yesterday, which was just the Wigner measure, well, the Wigner measure for the Schrödinger equations. You want to have more interest, well, you want to understand, for example, the spectrum of your operators and things like that. What does the spectrum of the Schrödinger equation for various potentials mean when HR tends to 0, different levels of energy, different, which range of time and which range of energy are relevant, I mean, are meaningful when we do this process and things like that. So I will just give a glance over that. I just want to say that well, people have been studying that for 3 decades, and there are lots of things to say, but just want to give an overview. So, what is harmonic analysis on the Lie groups and homogeneous domains? So when I don't talk to people who know about Lie groups, I start to say, well, I show pictures and I say, well, it is very, very important it is important and interesting to study manifolds which have symmetries. For example, the sphere, the torus, the hyperboloids, or just Rn. After all, Rn is very, very symmetric. And having symmetries means that you have a group action underlying your manifold. And well, in the examples I've given here, those manifolds are either already groups or they are quotients of groups. Like, for example, the sphere is SO3 quotiented by SO2. And if you look at that part of harmonic analysis, so the person, really big name in harmonic analysis on Lie groups and homogeneous domain was Elgason. And so, well, for him, harmonic analysis, for example, on the homogeneous domains, meaning the quotient of a group by a subgroup, means that you look at the functions on your manifold, or this quotient here, and you want to decompose those functions into joint eigenfunctions for all the differential operators on X which are invariant under J. I'm going to give examples. So, and you want to describe the joint eigenspaces and their irreducibility. So let me give examples. So the examples that I will give will be for the sphere, for Rn, and for the torus. So for example, let's rewrite history. You have your manifold, which is the sphere, and so the sphere S2, and the sphere is just SO3 over SO2. And I just said that doing harmonic analysis is looking at the operators on the sphere, which are invariant under SO3, under all the rotations. And it's not difficult to see that there is basically only one. There is only one operator on the sphere which is invariant under all the rotations, and it will be the Laplace operator. Okay. The Laplace operators and all the, and the Laplace operator squared and so on, but there is basically one.
So is this acting only on functions, or only acting on?
Well, yeah, but you're considering differential operators.
I would say Dirac operator is in there.
Well, you're considering differential operators. You're considering differential operators of scalar functions.
Only of functions. Okay.
Of scalar functions. Well, we can do. Yes, we can.
No. You just said invariant operators, but you didn't say acting from where. So
okay. Yeah. Okay. I was. Okay. Yes. Pardon. It is true that, but we can do that if you want. But I wanted to start with something.
No. I'm just questioning the fact that it's all Laplace operator, given that Dirac operators.
Well, so I should say that when I mean functions here, I mean functions on my manifolds, for example, on the sphere which can scalar valued.
Okay.
And well, at the moment they are scalar. In my talk today, there will be scalar valued. Of course, we can do much more. But well, as an interest, I didn't want to be too technical. So here, I mean decomposing the functions so you want to decompose the functions or the operator, for example, on the sphere, and which are, let's say, first example, scalar valued, and you want to decompose them. So you're considering all the differential operators on the sphere, which are invariant under SO3, and as I just said, it is a result of invariant theory, which says that basically there is only one. It is the Laplace operators and the Laplace operator and the polynomial of the Laplace operator. Of course, if I had functions which were valued not in R or C but in something else, I would just use more powerful results of invariant theory, and I would have other generators. But I could deal with that. But let's start with something which has only one generator. What we do. So on the sphere, you're looking at functions which are invariant under the Laplace operator, and you're looking at so by definition the joint eigenfunction. Well, if you look at the decomposing the function according to the Laplace operator, you obtain exactly the spherical harmonics, because the spherical harmonics of a given degree are the eigenspaces for the Laplace operator. So basically, in the case of the sphere, what you obtain is the very long definition I gave here. So the very long definition I gave here is just on the sphere. It just means that you are looking at the decomposition of a function according to spherical harmonics. So, yes?
So you have a manifold that is a Lie group, and then you have an action of a group, maybe the same group?
So in my next examples, what I will consider is the x is equal to g. But so I will say that x is equal to g, and it acts on itself by translation.
Okay.
And so this means that what I consider here is g times g, and here I use the diagonal action of g on the product of g times g.
Okay, and then g invariant, it will be like if you have a function, well.
So in the next example, I will look at the harmonic analysis on x, which is already a g. And so this means that I can write a g as g times g modulo the fact that they have that the two elements of g have to be equal. So the k here is just the diagonal, right? It's another copy of g. And so I'm looking at the differential operators on g, which are invariant under translation. Which are invariant under translation.
So basically, so you have a function about at that point, and it's the same as if an element of the group G acts on the point X, it will just come out of the front of the.
So basically, the action on the group is just translation, and the action on the function is just translation. So I translate, and so having a differential operator which is unbound under that means that if that basically your differential operator commutes with the translation. So when you think of the example of G equals Rn, it's what we just discussed. When you look at Rn, and just act on Rn by translation, and you're looking at differential operators which commute with translation. So basically, when you think about it, they have to be the differential operator with constant coefficients. Because if they don't have constant coefficients, I mean, for example, dx, if you differentiate with respect to x, this commute with translation. And basically, in one dimension, it's the only one, modulo having polynomials, and in Rn, it's the same story. So what you obtain when you think about it and you sit down, you write it down, the differential operators which are bound by translations are the differential operators with constant coefficients. And when I look at the eigenfunctions for those things, so differential operator like in dimension 1 dx, what are the eigenfunctions of dx? Well, not very difficult to see that it will be exactly exponential x, ix times a constant in dimension 1, but in Rn it's just x dot xi. And so when you look at functions which can be decomposed according to those things here, if it's not Fourier, if it's not looking at the Fourier transform, I don't know what it is. So, well, basically, in this context, harmonic analysis on Rn is just studying the Fourier transform. I'm just saying that the very long definition I gave here, in the case of G equals Rn, this is equivalent to studying the Fourier transform. And on the torus, it's the same story. I'm looking at the torus, and I'm looking at the action on the torus by translation. Well, the torus acts on this by translation. I do exactly the same stories. The differential operators which are bound by translation have to be the differential operators with constant coefficients. And again, the joint eigenfunctions will be of that form here, but with xi, an integer. And you're looking at functions which can be decomposed in terms of those functions, and if it's not a Fourier series, but it is a Fourier series. So harmonic analysis in the commutative setting gives the Fourier transform and Fourier series. So this, well, unfortunately, we have to go back to, I couldn't resist saying something about harmonic analysis and the very abstract part of system algebra, just to say that if you are doing very abstract analysis, well, what I just said is very much related with the motivation with what started the theory of C-star algebras in the 60s. So basically, what we just said is that if you look at a group acting on itself, you want to decompose functions on the group with respect to this action, and this is the equivalent to decomposing, well, to studying the regular representation on your group, which is just the fact that you take functions and you translate those functions. This is an action. So this is a representation of the group on this very big, well, on this Hilbert space L2 of G. And well, so from the point of view, well, so this started the theory of C-star algebras. It was understanding the, well, for example, the Plancherel formula for groups and things like that. Okay, so I think it's a bit okay, if you understand it, good. If you don't understand it, think about something else. The big name for that is Jacques Dixlier. So he really started he really founded the theory of C-star algebras, and the main motivation was to understand what I just explained, but from a very abstract point of view, and especially to obtain the Plancherel formula for groups. So I will go back to that a bit tomorrow, but in a very practical way. So, harmonic analysis. So what is harmonic analysis again? My point of view on harmonic analysis is that it's an extension of Fourier analysis, and it aims at at studying functional decomposition. So you want to understand decompositions of functions or operators or something like that, and so historical motivation is the analysis of PDEs, of partial differential equations. So, let's give a silly example. On Rn, let's say that we have the Laplace operator delta f applied to f equals 3, where delta is the usual Laplace operator. You want to solve to solve this equation. You know g, you want to know f. Well, you take the coefficients here are constant. It's not difficult to see that if you apply the Fourier transform, as the coefficients here are just 1, you just obtain this formula here. So you obtain that f hat is the Fourier transform of f hat will be g hat over this thing here. 4 pi is always equal to 1. And so you can write f as the Fourier inverse of that thing here, at least very formally. Sorry, so I forgot the 4 pi here. But, constant. So you can write f as the Fourier inverse of that thing here. Of course, it doesn't necessarily have a meaning, because here maybe this is not a good function, and you can't take the Fourier transform inverse. So this is extremely formal, and you can't. This doesn't work for any function g. And one part of harmonic analysis is to understand, to study the operators which are not that far of doing those types of things. And what you realize is that the operators you are led to study when you study those types of those types of equations, they are all of a certain type. They are all singular in the way I'm going to explain. You can, if you have, so all the operators you have ever met have a kernel, and there is a reason for that. But the kernel that appears in the operators in relation to that are singular on the diagonal, meaning they are good functions, good smooth functions when x is different from y, but at x equals y they are singular. So let me give an example. If T is the identity, that's a good operator. No? K in this case is a Dirac measure at x equals y. So K in this case is 0 outside of the diagonal, and on the diagonal is a Dirac measure. So even the identity is very singular. So you can imagine that other operators will be as well. So this is a very natural, it's very natural to study those types of operators, and they are very much related to what you want to do when you study PDEs. So the big name, so it's the singular integral operator theory, and the big names are Alberto Calderon, Zygmunt, and Stein, who cleaned up and pushed all this theory forward in the 50s and 60s. Any question? So an observation of harmonic analysis is to study a certain type of singular integral operators, and which are called the Fourier multipliers. And it's like a little sect. We meet between harmonic analysis and we discuss Fourier multipliers all the time. And so historically it's very important, but if you're not in harmonic analysis, you will really wonder why. Well, that's historically it's like that, and when you study harmonic analysis, you do that. So it's a tradition. So let me talk about Fourier multipliers. So Fourier multipliers, well, it relies on the Fourier transform, which I just defined here, and it just says that what happens is that you take your function, you take its Fourier transform, and on the Fourier transform side, you multiply by a given function, which you call your symbol, and after you come back. So you take the Fourier transform inverse. So for example, if you just take the symbol psi, psi gives psi, well, it's not difficult to see that what you will obtain is just differentiating with respect to x. And more generally, if sigma is a polynomial in psi, then T sigma is the corresponding differential operator where you formally replace psi with the derivative, integral constant. And so a very important example is the Hilbert transform, which is just a function which is equal to plus and minus 1 modulo this constant here. It is very important in signal processing and also in the history of Fourier multipliers. And what I'm going to say is that those operators are singular integral operators, where for the symbols that you usually consider. So first, let me say that Fourier multipliers, when you look at the definition, it's not difficult to see that they are invariant under translation, in the sense that they commute with translations, and that they are convolution operators. So if you are not familiar with convolution, it's well, it just say it's I think it's defined later on. Yes, here it's this is a convolution. So you can write it as an operator like that. So it's a convolution operator, and basically this is there is an equivalence between being a Fourier multiplier, being invariant under translation in this sense, and being a convolution operator in this sense, with the convolution being defined by that. And it's not difficult to see that using the Plancherel formula. The Plancherel formula, which says the Plancherel formula was summarized here by saying that the Fourier transform is a unitary map from L2 to L2. So the Plancherel formula says that if you take the L2 norm of the Fourier transform, it is equal to the L2 norm of your function. It was summarized by this here. So if you use the Plancherel formula, if your symbol is bounded, then the corresponding operator is bounded on L2. Just a consequence of the Plancherel formula. An obsession of harmonic analysts is to say, okay, which other hypothesis should I add on the symbol so that I obtain an operator which is bounded on other spaces, for example, on LP spaces. And so Milin was the first one to say, oh, but it suffices that sigma satisfies those properties here. So, and the proof relies really on saying, oh, but those operators are singular integral operators. Yes?
Why do you exclude the case p equal 1, p equals 1?
Because I exclude the case p. I exclude the case p equal, okay, in the case p equals 1, it goes from L1 to weak L1. So, and the thing is, okay, I'm a bit, the thing that what you prove is that you prove the property from p equals 1 to 2 with p, well, for the case p equals 1, as I just said, it's from L1 to weak L1. And after you consider the duality, and that's, well, you do interpolation and duality. Okay, well, I can talk about harmonic analysis all day, so, but, well, p equals 1 is not that good because the dual of p equals 1 is L infinity, and the dual of L infinity is nasty.
Can it be like? Can it be worked out in a certain way?
Well, so as I just said, for p equals 1, you have L1 to weak L1. After, you have lots of people who have come up with lots of other spaces. I just gave the first historical result in this domain. after, those questions have been, there are zillions of articles which deals with those questions in this context and in other contexts. So
I'm asking because I'm interested in applications in data science, and they use a lot functions in L1.
Yeah, well, L1 is not a very good space.
Okay.
Because the dual of L1 is L infinity. Right? Basically, L1 is not reflexive, so the dual of L1. But you have a lot of, there are a lot of other spaces that have been studied. That you can be sure. But the point is that this question and those types of questions was what was started the theory of singularity of operators. And the thing is that you don't need to consider only multipliers. This works for any integral operators here. So not only of convolution type, but any type of operator. And let's go back to quantization is a big word, but so let's just say that people in the 60s realized that you could study a lot of things if you were to consider operators of that form here. And so I mentioned it yesterday, that in the 60s, Kohn and Nirenberg started to do something which I call the Kohn-Nirenberg quantization, which was given by this formula here. So if you're a harmonic analyst, you just start by saying, if sigma doesn't, if your symbol here does not depend on x, you obtain a Fourier multiplier. And I can say a lot of things about that. But, this is this is the definition of a pseudo-differential operator using the quantization, the Kohn-Nirenberg quantization, if you do analysis in a relatively naive way. And so you see that if there is no sigma here, it is the Fourier inverse formula. So what you obtain, if sigma is constantly equal to 1, you obtain just the identity, because it's a Fourier inverse. So you just obtain f of x here, because of the Fourier inverse formula, so you obtain the identity. If sigma is a polynomial in psi, as we just said before, you obtain all the differential operators with constant coefficient. And if you add x here, so if you have a polynomial in psi with coefficients which depend on x, using this quantization, it's not difficult to see that you obtain the corresponding differential operators with the coefficients which depend on x. And but when you do analysis, having written this formula is not enough. You would like to say, have you really, really, really defined an operator? Where does it act? What does it do? And what is it good for? And why do I talk about pseudo-differential operators and pseudo-differential calculus? So you will never ever, I've never found a definition of a pseudo-differential calculus or pseudo-differential operators. People just talk and talk and talk. So I will give you my definition. So my definition is that you have a bunch of operators. They have to form an algebra in the sense that you can compose them, you can multiply them in the sense of composition of operators. And you should have a notion of order. It should be stable under taking the adjoints. It should generalize, it should contain the differential calculus. So you want to study differential equations, so you have your differential equations with lots of differentiation and so on. So you should be able to obtain, the bunch of operators you're considering should at least contain them. And they should act on some spaces that you know well. So when you do analysis of PDEs, you will think of Sobolev spaces. And of course, the notion of order should be related to the action that you have on Sobolev spaces. So basically, the loss, so the order should control the loss of derivatives that you have when acting on Sobolev spaces. So So this is my definition of a pseudo-differential calculus. It's an algebra of operator. You should have a notion of order which is related to how it acts on, for example, Sobolev spaces. Well, it should be happy to meet, to look at the adjoint or something, and well, it should generalize the differential calculus. So that, I mean, it should contain the differential operators you have met since high school. And well, there is a preference for you when you can do that with the notion of symbols, and I'm going to explain with asymptotic expansions. And this is a tool coming from PDEs. And so, as I said, some people started, for the beauty of studying things, they started to talk about the Fourier multipliers and so on and so on. And some people started to realize that, in fact, to those singular integral operators, you had a notion of, you could associate a notion of symbols. And the symbols here are just functions, so they are well, you can do lots of things with the symbol. And the first time people started to say, okay, this must be important, is when it was used in the proof of the index theorem by Atiyah and Singer, who won the Field Medal at the end of the 60s for their proof of the index theorem, and they really used the pseudo-differential calculus. So that's why people started to say, okay, we're going to study that, because so, but this is mainly, well, the pseudo-differential operators are also used when you study PDE, especially regularities of the solution of your equation, and lots of other questions. So the question is how, well, so you have this beautiful formula here that we discussed yesterday. How from this formula do you get a bunch of operators which do those types of things? Well, you need to have a good class of symbol. You need to have a good class of symbols. So the first one, historically, the first class of symbol was defined by Farmander, and it satisfies this, well, it's the smooth function on R2n which satisfies those properties. So you can see that it's really much related to the property I gave about Fourier multipliers. So if you have never seen this formula, you're wondering what's happening. But so it just says that the dependence on x, well, it doesn't really matter. What matters is really for high frequencies psi, and basically sigma in psi should be, well, if it's of order n, should behave like psi to the n. So that if you differentiate with respect to psi, you just lose basically for high frequencies something of order alpha. So you can check that, well, if you look at those functions, they are good, they are nice. And well, of course, if you take, what's good with those things here is that they contain all the symbols contain all the polynomial inside with coefficients which depend on x, such that the coefficients are bounded, and also all their derivatives are also bounded. And so that if you look at the corresponding calculus, or so if you look at the corresponding operators to those symbols satisfying that, it contains the usual differential calculus. So at least we have one box ticked, we generalize the differential calculus. Another example is something related to the functional calculus of the Laplace operator. And well, so this should ring a bell with respect to yesterday. The question is what happens if you consider the product of two pseudo-differential operators. So if you have op A composed with op B, well, it won't be op of A times B, but you will have a formula. So here it will be a formula for this function here, which will be, well, you have it here, and it is not a formal thing. It's not like that should work more or less like that. What I mean so here I forgot. So here, what I mean is that if I take so this symbol here, which I don't really know, it's something, and if I take the n first term, so for alpha in the norm, well, in length, for alpha in length smaller than alpha, so if I take this minus the n term in that sum here, this is of order m1 plus m2 minus n. So this is not some formal thing. This is really like and in fact, what I didn't write is the fact that those classes of symbols are Frisch spaces, and you have the continuity with respect to the topology. And again, so you have more or less the same story for taking the adjoint. And I want to insist that those expansions are not formal; they have very good analytical meaning. And so bottom line, what you obtain when we take the op of all those symbols, we obtain an algebra of operator, and because of those two things, which we realize that well, it is stable under taking the adjoint, and it is stable under composition as well. So this is a bit of work. Another thing which was in my definition is that you want to see how it acts on spaces, on functional spaces. And so if you take an operator for the zero, then it's bounded on L2 of Rn. And more generally, using the definition of Sobolev spaces and the formula here about and the formula at the bottom of the line here, it's not difficult to see that this implies that T acts on Sobolev spaces in the same way that differential operators act on Sobolev spaces. So I would like to say that this needs a bit of work. It's not formal. It is work in analysis. You look at your stuff, you decompose your function, you decompose your kernel, you massage these things, you think about it, you recompose. It gives you the electron. So other properties of like symbol classes is I'm going to need those operators. If you look at the symbols which are in all those symbol classes, they are called regularizing because if you look at the corresponding operators, they map distributions, so things which have potentially some singularities, to smooth functions. And why did we do all that if we are not really particularly interested in quantum mechanics at this point of history? Well, because the point was to understand how to invert an operator. Let's say you have a differential operator and you want to construct its inverse. The inverse of a differential operator will be very, as we saw for the Laplace operator, most likely it won't have a meaning on any function. But if you have something not so, if you want to have something which is almost an inverse, well, you can construct it with the theory of two differential operators. And what it is to construct a pseudo-inverse, which is called more commonly a parametric, is so you have your operator T, and you would like to construct an operator S, so that St and Ts is equal to the identity modulo something you don't care about. And the things you don't care about is the regularizing operators. So that's and so this was why it was very, very, very important when you study the regularity of solutions. When you study index theorem, well, those things don't matter from the point of view of compact operators and so forth, index theory and things like that. So that's why this is because of this property here that people were interested in two differential categories. So I will need a small remark that you can characterize. You can characterize those operators on Rn because of how they act on Sobolev spaces when you take the commutator bracket with the differentiation and multiplication. But okay, let's forget that. A very important thing as well is that what happens if you change variables? So if you have a change of coordinates, so here you change coordinates, and I denote by the same symbol, by the same letter, the fact that if I take a function, I compose with a change of coordinates. So I have up sigma, which is with the usual coordinate, and if I compose with changing the variables, I have changed the variable of my operator, and it remains a pseudo-differential operator. But the thing is, the corresponding symbol will be it will be related to the first symbol in the following way. You will need to do changes of variables in space, changes of variable as you expect in phase. So you will need to take the Jacobian and act on it here. But you will have also other terms. So why am I insisting on that? It's because, okay, keep that in mind. Oh, yeah. Keep that in mind. The thing is, so you can define a lot of, so let me go back to symbol classes. I just want to say that Hermodor symbol classes are not the beginning and the end of symbol classes. You can define a lot of other symbol classes. For example, you can define those ones where basically you don't gain as much. So you don't gain as much if you differentiate with respect to psi, and you're penalized when you differentiate with respect to x. So to make the link with what we saw yesterday, you also have this semi-classical thing where you have in the symbol classes, you have the Planck constant here, when you have a little h here appearing in the conditions you're imposing, and you want to understand this interpretation of quantum mechanics goes to classical mechanics. Another, another very common symbol class is the Shubin classes. It's just so you treat x and psi exactly on the same footing, and in this case it's more common to use the Weil quantization. And I thought that would be finished by now. And the thing is that in the 70s, everybody was thinking, basically every week people were coming up with ideas of new symbol classes. Like every week people were publishing. It was like a whole industry of symbol classes. Until Hermodor again presented a way of defining symbol classes. He just said, well, I considered a metric in phase space, and I need also the weights. And this will define all the symbol classes that people have been producing for 10 years. I can all view them within this framework. And this was the real beginning of analysis in phase space and micro-local analysis. In this case, OVI is more suited to some extent. But you can show that for the Hermodor classes of symbols, whether you would consider the Kohn-Nuremberg quantization, the Weil quantization, or the tau quantization I presented yesterday, they all yield the same calculus. And for me, the Kohn-Nuremberg quantization is much more natural because of the fact that if you remove or if you freeze x, you obtain a Fourier multiplier. And maybe I will finish here and I will continue tomorrow. The classical Hermodor calculus is to consider symbols which satisfy the properties I said before, and which admit an expansion in the homogeneous symbols. And so in this case you work modulo smooth symbol. And the classical Hermodor calculus you can do it on any manifold, but only the principal symbols make sense. So basically you have to work, if you're looking at something of order m, only the terms of order m will make sense, because so you work modulo Sn minus 1, and it is related to what happens when you change coordinates when you change coordinates. When you change coordinates, we said that we could relate We have this formula here. Yeah, here. Oh. So we have this formula here, which says that if you change coordinates, basically the first term does what you want. You really have a change of coordinates in the phase space, but you have also a lot of rubbish of lower order terms. So the idea is that if you use Hermann's calculus, you can do it on the manifold, but you consider only the principal symbol. And as you consider only the principal symbols, I mean, whether you consider the Kohn-Nuremberg quantization or the Wahl quantization, it's completely the same. So all what I talked about yesterday, if you consider manifold, is completely irrelevant. And another thing is that if you want to consider something which is not that class of symbol, well, for example, if you want to consider the rho delta generalization, then because you want to make sense of things on any manifold, so you need to see what happens when you change charts. You need to impose relations between those rho delta generalization, and of course you have to exclude all the interesting cases. So people have started to say, oh, is there a way to have a quantization of the phase space following a certain connection? So this was done by initiating by Widom, after there was some work by Sakharov in the 90s up to now. So, and maybe I will stop here. Yeah, okay. So tomorrow I will give my last 2 slides of today, and I will talk about what I do, meaning harmonic analysis and pseudo-differential operators on Lie groups, especially on compact Lie groups, nilpotent Lie groups, and in particular the Heisenberg group, and I will talk about what I really do on